Warm welcome from Geneva, Switzerland. I'm Reda Sadki from the Geneva Learning Foundation. I welcome you to this 5th episode of our dialogue for learning, leadership, and impact. First of all, I want to thank the contributors who have helped to bring this dialogue to life. There are many venues where leadership, learning are discussed. I don't know of another one quite like this one. That's kind of why, with my co-convener, Karen E. Watkins, we decided to try it. Focus on practitioners from everywhere, working on everything, fusing theory and research with practice, and dedicated really to exploration with no rigid institutional or disciplinary boundaries. Unfortunately, Karen E. Watkins is in a plane right now and will not be joining us, but I'm very happy to introduce some of our guests, or we call them contributors. So in the room with me are Bill Gardner, Katusha Farah, and Bill Wigginhorn. Bill Wigginhorn joins us for the first time. I think it's fair to describe him as legendary. He is the founder of Motorola University, the first corporate university of its kind, rethinking what a university might look like for, in the context of corporate learning, in the context of U.S. Fortune 500 businesses in the 1980s and 90s. Thank you for joining us, all of you, and warm welcome to you, Bill Wigginhorn. We have two Bills. So Bill Gardner is an amazing executive coach with a deep, long experience, who's been sharing his insights pretty much every week. I want to welcome both Bills. And Bill, yes, go ahead.
Just thank you for the introduction. That's all.
All right. And Bill Gardner, how are you feeling about the dialogue tonight? This is not your first time, not your first learning and leadership rodeo.
It is not my first time. Each one seems to get a little more thorough, and I have a better feeling each time. So I'm looking forward to a great experience this afternoon.
All right, wonderful. And with us as well, as I said, is Katusha Farah. Katusha, you have been here before. Welcome back. You have a fascinating question that you submitted as a key contributor. We're going to discuss this question of equity when looking at digital training. But how are you feeling about the dialogue tonight?
No, thank you so much. It's great to be back, and I look forward to it. It's wonderful to see so many different, so many contributors from different experiences, because I really think this is what enriches the discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I want to also greet all of those of you, we call you contributors. If you are listening in, we consider you to be a potential contributor, and we have some contributors in the room. Warm welcome to you as well, wherever you may be. If you send us your greetings, we'll acknowledge you. And if you send us your questions or comments, we are reading every one of them. So what's up tonight? We're going to kick off with this question about equity when discussing digital learning. And then we're going to go off not on a tangent, but on two singular leadership journeys with two people who have been listening in, who work at the Geneva Learning Foundation. That's Charlotte Mbou and Minja. And they have a history, of course, long before joining the foundation. And it's not so much because they work here, but because of their singular journeys that we're going to explore with them. Those journeys and look at that through the lenses of learning and leadership. We're going to talk, especially with Ja and with the key contributors, what is the value and significance of peer learning? What does giving and receiving feedback have to do with leadership, in fact? And then today, for the first time, we'll be calling on contributors to fill the empty chair. This was a wonderful suggestion made by a contributor, Nancy Dixon, and we're going to choose a person in the room and ask them about their views, experience, insights on leadership, and share their journey. So if you'll see with Charlotte and Ja what the questions are, where we go, and I'm sure you'll be thinking about your own experience. So this will be an opportunity for one of you to share back and to share your insights, in addition to the comments and the questions and so on that we've had in previous dialogues. Big issue is this question of return to work. So the shift from remote back to in person, back to the brick and mortar offices. So there's a lot of articles. There's a sort of stream flow in the news, and a few struck me. I've shared the links in the chat. I'll share them again if you want to go and look at some of the articles. But it's really what the contributors here have to say about this issue that is of interest to me. And then, if we have time, I'd like to end talking about the potential for a kind of renaissance. We talk about, of course, the shock of COVID. We talk about the impact of digital transformation, what that means for learning. Really interesting article with the CEO of Patreon, who was interviewed in the publication The Verge, and that's the one that I'd like to discuss. So we have with us, let's see, we have Noor Moline, who has just joined us, Abdeladif, and Borema Kabore. We're not going to be able to acknowledge everyone, so I'm just acknowledging 3 people we have with us, contributors in the room. AP, if there's any way you could change, yes, just share your name or introduce yourself. Caroline, Emmanuel Musa, Esther Devejisa, Esther Wojcicki is back, and a warm welcome to you, Harriet Lewis, Joseph Ngugi, and Ning Win Rita Wililo. All right, let's get going then. I want to start with Bill Wigginhorn, who is with us for the first time. And in 1990, Bill, you wrote, "Why in the world," you ask, "should any corporation have its own university?" And you said your answer is a story of how you, at Motorola at the time, came to create one. And you described it as a kind of odyssey, a 10-year expedition full of well-meaning mistakes, heroic misapprehensions, and shocking discoveries. In part, you wrote, it's a slowly unfolding definition of education and change that shows why successful companies in today's business climate must not only train workers, but build educational systems. And then so this is an HBR article, you say we could have called it an educational resource facility, but who would that have electrified? So I met you, Bill, when you visited Geneva in 2013. It's hard to describe the dialogue that you and I had. I was trying to figure out how to build a new kind of organization, what ultimately became the Geneva Learning Foundation. It's one of a few times in my life that the intensity of the conversation made me have dreams about it that night. I'm just curious, what is your recollection of that initial meeting? And was there anything that surprised you when we first met?
Well, I remember the meeting very well because we were talking about a type of an organization that you were dreaming of that was totally different than anything I'd come across. And also shortly after that meeting, you took me to, I think it was the Red Crescent session where you had students from all over the world participating in a session on a particular training topic. And that was really one of the first times where I'd seen technology used that way. But, kind of the slogan back when we started university came from our CEO. He said, if you think training and education is expensive, try ignorance. And that really became our theme, was how do you keep people from becoming ignorant in a world which constantly changes? So even if you came out with a software degree, we knew that within months it was a half-life. And so there at that time, we had 165,000 employees, and they were all entitled to be constantly upgraded in their skill set. And I think that made it unique. And in our conversations, it started in Geneva, that seemed to also be a dream of yours. These things have to be reinforced by, I think, leadership, by investment, by policies that support it, and by giving people time. And again, that seemed to be just part of the agenda that you were putting together, and I just love supporting.
Thanks, Bill. And you shared with me at the time, and I think you needed someone who's kind of knew the humanitarian side, a corner of the universe, what you call the Leadership Acceleration Program that you were doing with Tetra Pak, and that you did, I know, several years, you've kept doing since then. And here's how you described it. You said this Leadership Acceleration Program is designed to give our future leaders the insights and tools they need to further develop and strengthen their leadership competencies and harness their full potential. That sounds like every leadership program yes, ever. Yes, what would you say? There is something that certainly struck me as being very surprising, even shocking, in terms of how you actually sort of designed and then implemented that. What do you think is that that you did? This was, I think, in 2015. That you did and do differently. What makes that difference between the kind of humdrum, typical leadership development thing that exists in pretty much every corporation, and the one that's going to generate excitement, that's going to get people motivated, and that's going to have people remember it years or even decades later?
Yeah, we actually had two populations. We had the young leaders who were selected by the CEO and at that time his peers. But it was also for the CEO because in this model, you selected people from cross disciplines across the geographies. And you gave them a problem, or in this case, a series of problems that were challenges for the CEO and his leadership team. And you gave them 6 months to come up with solutions. And two things happened. One is that, and probably 70% of the times, they actually came up with a solution that got implemented. And number two, new talent was discovered that was not on the radar of anyone in the top management. And so over time, what we noticed is that everybody who participated in the program either got promoted within about 18 months, and usually a two-step promotion, or it became really clear they no longer really fit in the organization and they left. And that was probably about 7 to 8% of the people. But I think what made it unique was they were working on real issues. They were put in an environment very different than their home base. They worked with a cross-cultural, cross-functional team, and they were going to be listened to by the board of directors and the senior management team. And one of the things we always said to the team was, be careful what you recommend because you might have to implement. And we sent teams all over the world. We had them in Afghanistan, we had them in Kuwait, we had them throughout Latin America, throughout Asia, et cetera. So these were not, boondoggle trips. They were pretty serious things, and people took risk, and both from the senior leadership and from the participants. But the results were very, very good. And the program lasted for 11 years. We were actually going to do it again this year. And with COVID, it just became too much of a challenge. And I decided that you need to regroup and come up with a new model. But I think the former CEO and the current CEO were pretty happy with it.
That's fascinating. Now, I'd like to ask you some of the questions we've been discussing in previous episodes of the dialogue, which is around how each of us conceptualizes leadership, but how we came also to think of leadership in a particular way. So, how do you define the notion of leadership? How is it different from notions of leadership, and how you've defined it in the past? What has changed over time in your view, in your experience?
Well, my definition of leadership is the ability to take an individual or a group to a destination they wouldn't normally reach on their own. And involved in that is also the ability to listen to the minority opinion. Because again, one of the things we found in these problem-solving journeys, actually, that usually there was one or two people who simply saw the world very differently. And as a leader, it was important to listen to them, to make sure that their views got well articulated to the rest of the group, and were given a fair chance for eventually implementation. I think you can be a very quiet leader. And by that, I mean, you lead by example, the old concept of the servant leader. You don't need to be one of these prima donna type of leaders that you see many CEOs becoming today. Now, I think in today's world, since we've been working remotely now for 15 months, the ability to motivate people through using the technologies that you are today becomes increasingly important. I've sat on two boards, and the one board, both boards have been meeting electronically for 15 months. But one of the boards, the oldest person on the board, who actually is the chair, is 87 years old. She had never used technology. But 15 months into it, she's almost as good as our 22-year-olds on the board. And again, has adapted her leadership style to be modified according to the requirements of the times, which is simply not having that ability to get together physically, but the ability to get together through communities such as you have this evening.
So let's get personal, Bill. When and how did you realize the significance of that leadership question in your work in life that you were doing, and who or what helped you come to that consciousness?
When I was 22, 23, I worked for a consulting firm that was very unique. It was funded by an Italian pizza maker, to be honest. But he put a lot of money into creating a group to look at problems others would not tackle. And one of our first assignments was with the state of Ohio to help rebuild the Ohio National Guard system after the Kent State University massacre. And all the press wrote about what happened to those who were attacked. There was very little studied or written about what happened to those who were given the command to fire. And so that became a very good case study for me of understanding when leadership is lacking and not having the moral fortitude to say, no, I will not do that, or we need to go a different direction. So that was my biggest wake-up call starting that. And then, throughout life, I've just had the opportunity to work in 60 different countries, see thousands of leaders, and from each one learn something. But that was the first wake-up call.
And what difference, once you had that wake-up call, this new consciousness about the significance, the importance of leadership, what difference did that make for you? What difference has it made for you?
Well, the biggest difference was not to accept blindly the directions or orders that come out of a corporate leader. For 30 years, I kept journals, and the journals, I had one called Dumb Things Executives Say and Do. And it was a collection of things that executives did over time from multiple companies that just made no sense if you're really trying to lead people to a new level, to a new purpose, to fill your mission. But yet over and over and over, it would happen. So I would read that, every couple of months just to wake myself up and make sure I wasn't doing as many of those dumb things as I was recording from others.
And what for you is that relationship between leadership and learning? How are they linked, if you consider that they are?
Well, I don't think you can be a leader without being a constant learner. Without learning, all of a sudden you're not going to be leading much. There were two military generals that have served in the U.S. Recently. And usually I don't look at military leaders as the leadership. But the thing that struck me about both these generals is that when they were moved from post to post, the only thing they moved with them were their libraries. And their libraries were filled with literally thousands of books, not about military, but about culture, about values, about different environments. And from that, they developed their own kind of leadership philosophy, and develop their next generation leadership skills. And I think we all need to do that.
Thank you, Bill Wigginhorn. I now want to turn to some of the key contributors in the room to hear. We are fortunate in that amongst the key contributors, there are a significant number who have dedicated their life's work to the study of learning and leadership. And I want to turn to you to ask, as you heard Bill tell little fragments of his journey, what are the insights? What are you taking away from it? How are you listening to what he is sharing about that the views on leadership, the experience of leadership, and what are you listening for in order to unravel what goes into and can come out leadership? I suggest we start with Bill Gardner.
Okay, thanks. Reda, you and I talked just briefly that I knew of Bill Wigginhorn. And so let me just clarify that a little bit because you'll see how influenced I've been by him. When I was at Advanced Micro Devices and was put in responsibility for not just organization development, but leadership development, we had a pretty active leadership development program that was successful, going very well, until we had our first change in CEO. And we brought a CEO in from the outside. He had previously been the president of the Motorola semiconductor sector. And in my first meeting with him, he wanted to know what we were doing in leadership development. I went through the programs with him, and then he gave me a name, and he said, this guy, I don't know whether we can get him away from Motorola or not, but try, because what you're doing, I want what we had at Motorola. And so I basically hired a manager from Motorola and who came over and designed and implemented our leadership programs for the rest of the time that I was there. So the key pieces I was picking up as Bill talked were the action learning piece, because we started to add that piece where handpicked directors would be in cross-functional, global teams that would be given a real issue, something that the senior executives were working on. And we worked with them in workshops to learn how to present to senior executives and what they were interested in, but also project management, project development as they came up with solutions to thorny problems. So my reaction was it's really good to finally make the whole connection to what had come out of Motorola University to what happened with us. A large part of my success in that organization came from following that model. And I will say that CEO, when he kicked off each one of our leadership programs, he always told the story of the fact that here, after all these years in the business, he stayed in touch with every one of the people in his cohort that went through those workshops. And he said, I stayed at Motorola. A lot of people went to other companies. We are constantly in touch with each other. We hire each other at certain times, but it formed a network that not only continued to work together across different organizations, but as he put it, continued to learn from each other. They learned in the very beginning of their leadership journeys, and they were continuing to learn even as many of them were CEOs of other companies, smaller and larger companies. So the insights for me really are the social necessity, I think, of people learning together. And beyond that, the journals are the reflecting to become a continuous learner, even if you're not in a workshop or even if you're not in some kind of formal learning experience. The best leaders that I coach are the ones that are learning every day, maybe every hour or every minute, on what they're doing, the impact that's having, how can they do it better, what did they do that wasn't exactly the way they wanted to do it, how can they interact in a more effective way. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but that was the impact on me. It's great to I've read Bill. It's great to finally hear his voice and see his face.
Thanks,
Bill,
Bill.
if I could jump in a moment. The CEO you worked with taught me two things. One is humility, because when he went to his first officers meeting, and we would have those every couple of years, most people did not know him. And because he was of Mexican ancestry, they thought he was the waiter and asked him to go get them drinks, which he did without ever saying anything. And of course, later on that evening was introduced as one of the youngest vice presidents in history, which made those people feel pretty small. But I'll never forget him doing that and just saying, you show your moral spirit by what you do, not what you say. The second thing is his mother owned a bookstore in Mexico. And he told her when anyone ever came in, looked at a book, but couldn't afford to buy it, just give them the book and put it on his tab. Because he thought it was so important that if anybody wanted to continue their learning, they'd be given the resources to do so. So sorry to interrupt there, but I just think those were two things he taught me that eventually got incorporated into some of our leadership programs.
So it's amazing to think about, those networks of learning leaders in that corporate space and how knowledge and experience got shared. We have from Emmanuel Musa, who is an immunization professional working in Nigeria, a comment about something you said, Bill, that some leaders are quiet. And Emmanuel says in this world, when you're don't you need to have a loud voice in order to be heard, in order to exercise leadership? Emmanuel, can you introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from? What are your thoughts? What is your experience in the different kinds of ways to express and exercise leadership?
Hello, good evening, whatever the time is. I'm happy to hear your presentation, Bill, and your progress and what you've been doing to the world and then to the community at large. And then we keep praying for people like you to continue to excel in their leadership and then how to impact even the world at large. I've been interested from your speeches, and your presentation has been very quite interesting, and I'm trying to learn from you. But then there's actually a word that you had said, and I feel, yes, you said leadership is all about people who are silent. And in this present generation, people need to, their voices need to be heard for them to, for people to be able to know, the social media has opened up so much on the issue. When you are quiet, you are not heard. And then when you are quiet, people don't even recognize that you have a very good leadership style or good leadership qualities. So it is when you shout and then you say, and some of these leaders, when they shout, they are not equally doing the best. But then because they shout more, people feel they are doing the right thing. But for the quiet one who are equally good, they feel they are hiding more of those leadership qualities they're having, and they feel they are not living up to expectations. So, sir, in this narrative, how can we be able to give me more light? I happen to be part of those quiet people, and when it comes to the issue of leadership. So I'm interested, and that's why I pose this question. Thank you, sir.
I'm just thinking there are 3 CEOs that have had the experience of interfacing with very large companies in the last 2 years are very quiet leaders. And in 2 of the 3 cases, they succeed a very bombastic leader. And it's been interesting because as a quiet leader, they demonstrate competence by getting things done, by listening to people, by building teams that make the decisions rather than, in their case, the CEO making the decision. And in 2 of those 3 institutions, their performance is much better than previously. And the corporation's more at peace. There's not as much constant infighting, turmoil as previously. But I agree with you. It's very difficult to be heard if you're too quiet. But your quietness can be very loud by the results that you provide. One of the executives, he's a CFO that my wife has coached, and when we started coaching him 10 years ago, he was kind of a junior executive. And one of the things that he learned is that in every meeting, he didn't have to say a lot, but he had to say something of consequence. And he had to step out of his comfort zone and take assignments that normally he would have avoided, and to get the feedback from the peers around him who respected him. And so, as I said, today he is CFO, Executive Vice President of a major firm. He is still a very quiet 6'5" giant. But people listen to him because he listens to them. So, and in different cultures, I know it's different. I worked for a while in Lagos, Nigeria. And I remember that, it's pretty vocal people. And at our town hall meetings, and this was with Rank Xerox, you had to shout to get your word across. But at the end of the day, it was those who perform who were recognized as the leaders. And I think, at least the people I deal with, most of them are what I would call the quiet servant type of leader, and those are the ones I enjoy being around.
Thanks, Bill. Let's go to, we haven't heard yet, and I'm eager to hear from Esther Wojcicki. I know you joined, I think, a few minutes later, but Esther, would love to hear, what do you think, what did you hear in Bill's narrative, in Bill's story and sharing on leadership? How does it resonate with you, and what are your thoughts? And then I have a specific question about digital and equity, and we'll start again with you, Esther, on that one.
So, first of all, I think it's a very interesting conversation. So thank you very much.
Whoops. Okay, Esther just muted herself. Let me see. I'm just going to ask her to unmute. This might be a technical glitch, and these things happen. They're just part of life. All right. I'm still asking her to unmute. So yes, go ahead, Esther. And please do briefly introduce yourself.
I think what happened in the last conversation with the quiet leaders, I think that's really important, because what somebody said, I'm sorry, I can't say who did it, is that the quiet leaders that are effective are those that listen to the other people. And I think that the leadership for the 21st century to listen to others and to form a team that are able to lead, not just by telling people what to do, but by actually working with them as part of a team. So that's my latest takeaway from what was just said.
Great.
And I think the era of the leader who is sort of top-down dictator is over. I don't think those are as effective as they were before. And then somebody also said in previous statement just a few minutes ago was that they've seen a lot of leaders make a lot of silly mistakes. And so if you're afraid to say that the emperor has no clothes on, then I think the company as a whole has a problem. That's my takeaway from everything that was said. So thank you, Graham.
Super interesting. We're not going to go there, but one could argue that authoritarian models of leadership are in fact on the rise, given their prominence in a number of countries. But we're not going to go there. Instead, we're going to talk about equity. And this is actually a contribution from Katyusha, who had a very specific question. So Katyusha works on climate change. I'll ask her to introduce herself to say a little more than that. And her question is, how do you ensure equity when looking at digital trainings, given that not everyone, and especially those most vulnerable, might have access to it? What are some of the solutions that we can look at in delivering at the last mile? So that is the question that folks like me who work in that space of development and humanitarian response deal with and think about every day, which is precisely why I think it's more interesting to turn this question to some of the folks whose experiences in the corporate learning space, where maybe access and equity issues are not necessarily always at the forefront. So I'm curious who would like to take that one on first. I suggest, Esther, I would love to hear how you think about that. Your latest venture is a startup aimed at the K through 12 market, kids. And how do you approach this question of equity when looking at digital trainings, given that not everyone, and especially those most vulnerable, are going to have access to it? Oh, I see Esther's microphone is moving up and down. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I am trying with my new company, Track.app, to equalize opportunity and to give kids an opportunity to work together with each other in pairs or teams, so that, kids in lower income areas or lower income parts of the world can also feel empowered. Because one of my main theories is that how you feel about yourself is probably one of the most important things. A lot of very smart people are fearful of asking questions and fearful of looking, quote, stupid. So they're afraid to pursue something when in fact they should. So I think that if we can help kids early being 8 years old and above, be in a situation where they can feel empowered and they are not afraid to ask questions, not afraid to start new things, not afraid to challenge long-held beliefs, I think the world is going to be in a better place. So that's, the question you asked really is a super important question. I'd love to get some other people's thoughts on it.
Let's start with Katyusha. Katyusha works in a UN agency. She'll tell us more if she's allowed to. But Katyusha, why are you asking this question? Why does it matter to you? And also, how is it related to a question of leadership? But first of all, where are you coming from with this?
No, thank you so much, Reda, and super interesting already to listen to Esther. So I'm really keen to have more feedback and then for others to help me think outside the box. So I've been working on issues related to natural resource management, climate change, disaster risk reduction for over 20 years. And a lot of the work has really been together with the communities living in rural, remote areas, so potentially poorest in developing countries, and with very little access to information or different resources. And a lot of the work that we do is in terms of participatory learning, assessment, working together to define objectives, a vision, and so on. Recently, I have been working a lot on what is called last mile climate services. So how do we bring climate and weather information to farmers, smallholder farmers that don't have access to this, using different channels of communication, sometimes radio, sometimes phones, etc., etc. And we are actually just about to launch a blueprint that looks at climate-informed digital advisories. And one of the main questions is, how do we make sure that, because for me, digital learning and the use of digital tools has a huge potential of reaching people at a scale. And it's something that could allow us to have a much higher impact on the ground. However, how do we make sure that the design, the rollout, the implementation of this does not further entrench some of the inequalities that exist? We know that, for example, men or women might have different access to information. There are communities who have less resources. They might not have good reception. In some countries, people are still illiterate. And so for us is really, if you're looking at supporting those who needs the most our help, how can we make sure that they also benefit from digital tools, and in this case, digital learning? And of course, it could be a mix of different tools, but it's something that I feel it's also important, because otherwise we continue to sort of support a two-way development in which those who might be in urban areas or might have access to different resources will always be able to learn and access this more than others. And that's where really my question comes from, because I see a great potential for this, but how do we ensure that we also reach the last mile? And and that's why I raised it. And thank you for taking this on board, Reda, and everyone else.
Thank you, Katyusha. Esther. So I heard the introduction of what the Tracked app, your current startup, is about. How important is it for you to ensure that, say, in the United States, that disenfranchised children from disenfranchised communities have access to the app, and how do you reconcile that with a business business imperative of a startup that needs to, at some point, make money? I don't know if Esther's going to be able to speak to us. All right, I'm asking.
Unmute.
Yes.
Sorry,
okay.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah. Sorry. I said this was a very important question. And what I'm pushing for really is to make sure that all kids have access to digital devices, digital internet access. I think this is an important right for all kids. And we give the program away. Basically, it's free to teachers in all areas. We are charging parents for it, but we don't charge parents in low income areas. And we're getting sponsorships from corporations so that this can happen. My goal really is kids in the lowest income areas, kids in refugee camps, kids all over the world that don't normally have access. That's my number one target group. And so far, there's many teachers that are very interested. So we have hundreds of teachers in classrooms around the world that are going to be using this in their classes. And we'd like to have more. And like I said, whatever we can do to help is basically what we want to do. And we make it work. I must say, the only major limitation is that it's in English. So the goal would be to have it in multiple languages all over the globe, so that, we can get teenagers in those communities who feel disempowered, by the way. Most people don't think of teenagers as a resource, but I do. And so it empowers teenagers to teach younger kids about things that they consider important or whatever they want to teach them. And, they inherit the world, and we should respect them more than we do right now. And so that's my goal. So if I could have more kids from lower income areas, that would be the best.
Thanks.
And we don't need to worry about that.
I want to turn now to Bill Wigginhorn. The classic example is, when Coca-Cola has the ability to get bottles of Coca-Cola to the last mile, to the remote village, yes, and that is on the business imperative of selling more product. What's your take? And then I'll ask you about the learning and leadership. What does learning and leadership have to do with that? But in the businesses that you've worked with, why is it that it kind of feels like a business that is about making money can get this done, can get the products or the service right down to the last mile, and yet the nonprofit sector, which is far from underfunded, there's a lot of funding from the global level that is supposed to flow down to countries, seems to struggle with that, including on this question of digital. How would you suggest thinking about it, thinking through a problem like that?
Well, we have a couple of dynamics going on right now. One is that with the new kind of satellites going up that will connect the world, hopefully through internet, which is an offshoot of the Iridium project that Motorola started in the mid-90s. It will make it accessible. So that's number one, is that you'll be able to connect at very reasonable cost to the device, to the internet on a global basis. And so then all of a sudden, to me, you have a community, and you can form pods of learners with, say, that teenage tutor, which would be very helpful. One of the nice things about COVID is that I think we learned a lot about remote learning. And I just look at my three grandsons in the neighborhood they live in, which is a very middle-class neighborhood, Chicago, where the neighborhood learn together, the 21 kids there. And the older kids tutored the younger kids. Now, their advantage is they all had iPads. The school provided curriculum. You had a couple hours with a teacher online every day. But they learned how to learn using the various technologies. We have a school down the road here in it was a very poor community. And an entrepreneur said, I'm going to make this school the best so that the brightest students in the county want to come here, and they will be the role models for the others. And today it is. It's absolutely the best school in the county. It has programs from age 2 through 8th grade. And every doctor, lawyer, executive wants their kid to be in the school. And only a third of the participants can come from there. But this is an example of somebody who understood corporate world, but I would say in a small sense, how to bring it to the last mile, how to form a community, how to have that community support this institution now over 20 years and make it the best. And today, the teachers there are the former students who started there in their kindergarten, first, second grade. So, I certainly don't have an answer for that. This on a global basis, but I think one, the technology is getting there, so it's going to be affordable. Two is I look at a model as we have here in the Heights of where community got together, made sure they had the best education and delivered it to that last mile. And during COVID, they took it actually to the individuals' homes rather than the school because we're not allowed to get together. Not a great answer, but something that.
All right, thank you. We are at the 45-minute mark, and I just wanted to take a couple of seconds to greet a few of the people who are listening in across different platforms, so YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you are welcome to the dialogue. Please do share your questions as well as your greetings. We've got mostly greetings right now from Mercy Onu-Peters, from Amel Eltahir, from Deepak Patro, all right, from Magaji Ubale Ado, from Kabir Isa Ado, from, right, you didn't tell us where you're from Jojo and Zengu, from Lumumbashi in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Frederick Jr. Eric from Abuja, Nigeria, and Kwada Asunduwa Chagwa. We're going to stop here for now for the greetings, but please do keep sending them. Send your questions as well. I want to shift gears and remind you, we're going to be filling the empty chair. This was a wonderful suggestion from a key contributor, Nancy Dixon, and talk about the leadership journey of two exceptional individuals that I have the pleasure and honor of working with every day. The first is Charlotte Mbu, and the second is Min Jia. One of the reasons for opening this dialogue was to explore that relationship between learning and leadership. And that means really thinking, first of all, at that leadership journey that we have as individuals. There may be a collective dimension, various kinds of movements, belongings, affiliations that we have. And even when this is so, it's still deeply personal and individual. It's also a process of accretion. And of course, we're going to remember the quantum leaps in significant learning. There's this moment of coming to consciousness about the significance, what leadership means, how important it is. There may be, for most people or some people, discomfort with calling yourself a leader, given the conflation between leadership and authority, leadership and management, leadership and perceived value in society. So we haven't heard their voices yet in this dialogue, but Charlotte and Jia, you both have remarkable journeys, independent of any discussion of learning and leadership. And before asking you about what is a leader and these other questions, let's start with those journeys. You have both worked in government structures, in bureaucracies, and then in the nonprofit world. Charlotte, you are from Cameroon, and Jia, you are from China. What do you think you have in common, other than that you're both women, you both work at the foundation, and you cannot give the same answer? Who'd like to start, Charlotte or Jia?
Thanks, Reda, and great dialogue going on. Thank you to all the speakers previously. So this is Jia. I will go first, Reda. I would say both Charlotte and I love literature. I think one of the things I love about Charlotte is she actually writes poems about her experiences as a learner and then as a peer supporter for learners in the courses that we offer. So I don't personally write poems, but I love reading one. And yeah, that's what I would say. I'm curious to find out what Charlotte thinks.
All right, Charlotte.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Reda. Thanks, Zah, and hi, everyone. And just like Zah said, it's a great dialogue that's going on here. For me, I think I was going to say one thing that we both have in common is that we both love learning. So I think that's that's why we are part of the Geneva Learning Foundation. So it's good to know you love poetry, Zah. We'll get to share some more.
All right, so Charlotte, I have some questions for you. So you've worked in public health and specifically in immunization, but you also told me once that you had dreamed of becoming a journalist. So how does a young girl or woman, I don't know what age you were when you held such dreams, such a dream, how does this grow and transform? Who or what makes a difference in how your life, what your life looks like over time? Do you feel that in your life you've pushed any boundaries? If so, what were they? And how did it turn out? A lot of questions to kick off.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Reda. So, and I think they are quite pertinent questions. Now, when I had a dream that I wanted to be a journalist, I think I was still in primary school, about 8, 9. And to me, the term journalist was like someone that gives information, that transmits knowledge. So to me, the definition of, sharing knowledge with others, getting people to get the right knowledge to learn, was the term journalist. It wasn't teacher, but it was journalist, because for me, at the same time, it was interesting, good information, right information, and entertaining, more entertaining than school, than the experience of school with teachers and all of that. So I just said, okay, when I grow up, I want to be a journalist. Now, while growing up and, getting to understand what transmitting knowledge, communicating information meant, I kind of like got the right perspective. So talking about my journey, when I was in secondary school, about 10, 11, I read this book. We're doing a literature, great people of our time. And I read the story of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Eleanor Roosevelt, and those two ladies that kind of like marked my life and the person that I had to become, because to me, it was like, okay, I need to be able to make a difference in my generation. So to me, I grew up with a kind of motto at the back of my mind that I am mad. So mad means make a difference, wherever I go. And basically, that defines the person that I became. Now, going to school, because of the orientations that I got, I did sciences, and so I did medical laboratory sciences at the university. I found myself in the field. I got recruited in the public service. That was 2007. I was 23. And being a young recruit, at that time, in a group where a number of us were young, we're just full of energy, and we're like, okay, we know the reputation our country has, we know the reputation our civil service has. We have to come with a different kind of, paint a different image, a different dynamic, a new spirit that is not being absorbed by the system, but really coming to bring about positive social change. So that is using what we have learned to create an impact. And I think that is what also helped me, that is in everywhere I worked. I had to try to look at the problems. If there is a problem, look for solutions without necessarily waiting for someone to ask me, or authorization. So if you see something you can do, and to solve a problem that does not require extra resources, then why not do it? So that was, and that's how I found myself in immunization. I wasn't trained originally as an immunization professional, because my training at basis was medical laboratory sciences. But we had a problem of immunization indicators. There was a health survey that was done, and it showed the coverage, the real coverage of my region, the south region of Cameroon. And I'm sorry, I didn't say I'm joining in from Ebolova in Cameroon, the south region of Cameroon. Was really low wet at 60-something% for Penta 3. And I was like, this is impossible, so something has to be done. And I started, like self-learning, on the job training, doing supervisions and all of that. And that is how I got absorbed into the immunization program as a data, managing the data, analyzing data, and trying to look for concrete solutions that could help us to improve upon what we're doing. And in 2015, there was my coordinator at the time, had another a job elsewhere, and there was a leadership void. And based on my experience, I had barely a year of experience with EPI, but I've had to find myself solving problems. So I had to sit in the position for almost a year and a half as a coordinator of the immunization program in my region. Have had to organize over 8 campaigns. And at that time, we were in a polio epidemic, so had to be learning at the same time while helping and coordinating and leading people to make a difference. And during that time, I can say that was 2015 and early 2016. I learned quite a lot. Reda, that was like a defining moment for me. So basically, that has been my journey with a lot of, I've taken a lot of shortcuts, but maybe with your next questions, I could give some more detail.
All right, thank you, Charlotte. We're going to go to Jean, but I'd like to remind you, so two things. The first is that after having heard a little bit of Ja's story, I'm going to introduce it in a particular way. I hope she won't hold it against me. But we're going to turn to the key contributors in the room, and of course to all the contributors to share their comments. But really, knowing that so many of you have this deep experience with leadership development, listening to Charlotte's and Ja's story, what are you listening for? What do you pick out that stands out, that you take away, and that might either confirm what you already believe about how leadership is developed, or might challenge your convictions or beliefs about leadership and the nature of leadership? And then that's not all, because after we've chatted with Charlotte and Ja, we'll be filling the empty chair and calling on those of you who are here in the studio with us for a volunteer who will be willing to share their journey and their story and share their insights about what they have learned about leadership over years of practice. So for Ja, I'm going to share a grossly reductive caricature of your story. All right. Here's how I understand it, and you're going to correct me because I'm almost certainly wrong. You went from a remote agricultural region of China to the capital city. You worked first for government, then for an NGO on education. And then somehow, I still don't have the full picture, you published a book about homeschooling in China, and probably did this before you turned 30, before then doing your master's in education at Oxford University. So can you tell us about this the first and second jobs for government and then for an NGO? What did you do? Why? For whom? What led you to education? And if you reflect on your last 5 years of working and studying in the field of education, just the last 5, what's the most significant change in your views about the role of education?
Thank you, Reda. Reductionism maybe, but it's actually accurate. So yeah, I come from a small village in the central part of China. For my first job, it was for a government-sponsored sort of education research institution in Beijing. I was trained as a translator, interpreter. So whenever we have international speakers come over, share their research findings and in different areas of K-12. So it was specifically focused on K-12. I would be the one interpreting that. And as time went by, I really got hooked into education. I was like, this is really fascinating. And after a few years working there, I started really feeling out of place because the organizational culture is really highly differential. And I wanted more opportunities to grow, but somehow I felt a bit limited. And so given my sort of growing interest in education, I told myself, why not, continue learning? So I applied and then fortunately got in and did a master in education research methodology. When I went back to China from the UK, one of the only, I would say, independent think tanks in Beijing at the time, they happened to be recruiting someone for a researcher position. And so I applied, I got in, and really found myself among a group of people who were really, how do I put this, courageous to share findings, research results that may not be there in other places. And that's how the homeschooling book came about. I got to work on the project because there were a lot of parents and communities within China that are seeking alternative approaches to educate their children because they're not satisfied with public schools, which may be cheap, but on the other hand, private, highly expensive international schools they can't afford, so they started homeschooling. There are obviously different sort of categories or types of homeschooling in there, but I was really proud to have been involved in that project. So yeah, that's basically my journey sort of in working in K to 12. But then later on, I get to work in adult learning, which is my journey with the Geneva Learning Foundation. And if I think back to the last few years, I think given my personal journey from this sort of rural background and then all the way here, now I'm based in Geneva. When I was little, education, according to my parents, was the only way out, you know, it was the only way for social mobility. And it actually, you know, dream come true for me, thanks to a few good teachers along the way. But that very narrow view of really viewing education as just task preparation, getting over one loop after another, one hoop after another, right now to me is completely, you know, killing our children of today. And so when I heard Esther was sharing her startup, I was really happy to hear that. And there are a lot of innovative startups and similar initiatives being created right now all over the world, as well as China, the context I know a little bit better. And regardless of it's whether parents or communities seeking alternative learning opportunities or it's adult learners, I think this narrow view of treating learners as empty canvases or empty containers just to put in more knowledge, get them over one exam, and then get them out in the job market to fill a job role that then can produce some, I don't know, gadgets out there for someone to use. That's not, I view humans now. It's really about learning, or, you know, education, if we use that term, is really about human flourishing. Intrinsic motivation is super important. For children, we talk about interest, right? So for adult learners, it's that motivation. So if we want any change at all, instead of just, you know, keeping the world as it is, as the status quo, I think it has to start from creating that environment for both children and adults to exercise agency, to exercise their motivation, to pursue what they want to learn. And then that's where change would happen. Yeah, that's my 5 cents, Reda.
All right, thank you, Jia. I want to hear from both Bills, so Bill Gardner and Bill Wigginhorn. Again, rather than, you know, with sort of a meta lens of leadership, what do you both hear? And also Katyusha, in fact. It looks like Esther Wojcicki has had to drop off the call. But before we go to the Bills, I want to go to Caroline, who reacted to Charlotte's story, saying, well done, first of all. Self-learning and commitment were key to your growth as a leader. Caroline, please introduce yourself. Would love to hear what struck you about Charlotte's story. What do you take away about what is leadership? What is, you know, so why is learning important for leadership? And what do you take away from Charlotte's story relative to your own journey?
Thank you very much, everyone on the call. Thank you, Reda, for having me. My name is Caroline Akoshile. I worked for UNICEF for 20 years. I'm retired now, but I'm not tired, as Communication for Development Specialist in Nigeria. And just like Charlotte shared, I came from the background of media, because I worked for my government in the Ministry of Education, then went to independent media before I joined UNICEF in the early 2001. To be specific, when we had polio, I didn't have so much information or so much experience on immunization. I had to learn, like she said, like she did. I had to learn by myself, and then from there, I had to also work with my colleagues. Really, I had buddies who were immunization specialists. I had to read and I had to be really committed, because I was very green in that area, but I had to do that before I could succeed. Eventually, I now became a Communication for Development specialist, and I had a lot of consultants that I mentored, and that, I mean, they're all doing well in Nigeria. So, so when she said a story, it really resonated with me that really you need to be committed. You need to have self-learning. You need to really go out there and work on your own and see how you can improve yourself before you can succeed and before you can be a leader and before you can also mentor other people in that line. Because right now I'm retired, but at the same time, I'm still working with people on the field. Over and out. Thank you, Reda. I hope I've contributed to what we are discussing. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I hope it's you're over, but hopefully not out. So now I'd like to go to Bill Wigginhorn and Bill Gardner and Katyusha Farah. What did you hear about learning and leadership in the narratives of Ja and Charlotte? What can we learn from their stories? Let's start with Bill Gardner.
Thanks, Reda. So you asked for a meta view, and here's what I heard listening to the two stories. Even though different stories, the similarities were identifying a status quo. So thank you for using that term. I had already written it down when Charlotte was talking, but for identifying a status quo where there's discomfort or where it's not right, or we feel a need for change or to do something to move off of that spot. And then implicitly, what leaders do, or explicitly, I should say, what leaders do, is say, if this status quo is not where we want to be, then what's our vision for where we can get things? If that last mile is taking an already excellent education program from an earlier speaker and getting it that last mile to the poorest children or the children without access to technology or whatever it is, if that's the vision, now we know where we are and we know where we want to go. And the thing is, what's stopping us? What's keeping us from getting there? And both speakers talked about having that set up, status quo, not happy with that, wanting to change, an implicit vision about what that meant, and starting to tick off the things that are blocking us from getting there. It's, in essence, a strategic look at how to use learning to get to where we want to be in my particular job, in my particular function, or not for profit, or frankly in the world. That's the way we need to be looking. Both speakers did not talk about, here's the problem, here's my solution, here's the problem, here's my solution. They're ticking away at it to get to that vision. And that was the meta piece that I heard that transcended actually all the stories that we've heard so far.
Thanks, Bill. And what do you hear, if anything, that is different between Bill Wigginhorn's own journey, with a few more decades, yes, in that journey, other than the added experience? What is it? Did you hear anything different or distinct in the voices of Ja and Charlotte?
To me, that's that meta look that I was giving. It fits with what Bill had talked about too. Even the question that you posed earlier that he asked, well, why would a corporation need a university, was answered by where we need to get to, and in this case, to make more profit or make more widgets or whatever, where we need to get to. We're not there right now. How do we get there? And one of the solutions is learning. Okay, how do we design learning in a way that most effectively gets to the people that can get us from where we are to where we need to be or where we want to be? So that's again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but that's what I hear. Right. Status quo, vision. How do we get to that vision? And how do we remember that's why we're doing this really sometimes not fun work? This is why we're doing that, because we want to get to that vision ultimately that fixes where the status quo is that's not acceptable.
Katyusha Farah, so you work, as you said, on climate change, complex issue. You have this keen interest that we share at the Geneva Learning Foundation in participatory methodologies. I wonder if maybe you heard anything in Ja's and Charlotte's narrative that you recognized as something that is an ingredient when working with communities where you see potentially exceptional people or people who truly are exceptional. Josse, how did you hear their stories or brief excerpts from their life stories? And what's the relationship to your thinking about leadership?
Thank you. I have to say, I think both stories were very close to home. Really nice to hear the experiences. I have a couple of reflections. One is that, of course, learning is not linear. It doesn't just happen in a classroom. Learning happens everywhere, and sometimes it's through difficult situations that we can really grow. I feel what something I really liked is that as you grow, and this is, you see it, that there are people that as they grow and they realize the opportunities, they realize the potential that comes from learning, they want to help others to have the same opportunities. They really feel, and that's what I felt from both interventions, that there is some desire to share and to support others to have the same opportunities, and to realize the potential that education has to transform lives. And you see this. You see when people learn how they're keen to share, how they want to learn more. And very often people who have had less opportunities are really so grateful and committed, and it's like sponges, a lot more, because they truly realize the transformational value of education. And I see this a lot. So it was really, really nice to hear both interventions. And I do think that this is what leadership is wanting to see other people grow, and really providing opportunities for others to grow. And to me, that's a sign of a strong leader who's not scared of others learning and growing, but if anything, he or she would act as a sort of catalyst for that growth.
Interesting. Bill Wigginhorn, what did you hear in these two narratives, and what are your reflections? Let's unmute you first.
Yeah, they're two great stories. And to me, each story is simply a journey. And it seems that both of your colleagues had a pretty good vision of where they wanted to go, and they were able to modify it as they went along and learn. And I was kind of thinking of two things that if I had to do over in my journey, I would do. One is start my education process earlier than I probably did, but start with learning how to think and how to problem solve, and do it in a structured way. And then go into a curriculum where I'd really understand the business models that I was going to participate in. And I've really become convinced over time that many people in the capitalist world have no idea how money is made. They really don't understand the whole system. And so I think that's important. And then to get a really advanced degree in liberal arts, because as my one boss said, no one wants to deal with a barbarian. They want to deal with somebody who has an appreciation for language, for culture, and in that journey, overcome my unconscious biases that I have. Because I grew up in part of the United States. I grew up in an Irish-German family. And you have unconscious biases that come through. And so it's to acknowledge them and then to deal with them. And as a leader, to bring in many diverse people who also have different biases, but each one of us has a different bias. And through the sharing of those biases and how to overcome those, I think we can come up with better solutions. And so to your two colleagues, I wish I was as young as they were, could reboot it and continue on that journey. Also, Ming, it struck me when you talked about your village, that in the 90s, Motorola adopted about 50 schools that I think they were called the Hope Schools. I don't remember anymore, but they were all in rural villages, very rural. One was so rural in the West, I'll never forget that the elder asked us who the emperor was. he did not know the communist revolution had occurred. I would just never forget that. But in every village were students who wanted to learn. And over time, we brought them all to the Great Hall. And some of these kids were on trains for days. And when they got in the Great Hall, you would have thought they were born in the Great Hall because they just measured up. And yet we knew where they came from. And I always thought if I had the ability to invest, I would have invested in those 100 students. It would have paid for my retirement because they were learners overcoming tremendous obstacles. But also, as Ming said, they all had parents who at least one parent believed that education was the way out. And so they were reinforced. And I see a lot of communities here in the United States where that reinforcement doesn't occur. So you really need somebody else to step forward. But they didn't have any technology. Very few of them had books, but they had elders who taught. And then eventually, as they got into the formal system, a couple of them went on to Edinburgh University. Another one got her PhD from Reading University in the UK. And several people came to the US because I've lived long enough now to track them from when they were in basically primary school to now having their doctorates. But your story just brought that back. And I'm just so pleased to see another person who's made that journey and continues to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill Wigginhorn. Thank you, Ja and Charlotte, Minja and Charlotte and Boo. This is part of the dialogue of the Geneva Learning Foundation on learning, leadership, and impact. I want to once again acknowledge a few of the folks. I never have time to acknowledge everyone much as I would like to. So we have Nasir Umar Safe, who joined probably midway from Nigeria, Mubarak Balarabe, Yalwaji Ibrahim, Endayo Iwat from Abuja, Robert Tibaya. And Amel says, thank you, Reda, and all. I don't know if that means you're going to sleep. We realize Sunday evening for some folks it may not be ideal. But again, we're looking for your questions and comments as well as your greetings. And we are going to, if there is someone in the room who feels, and it's got to be an opt-in, you have to want to do this, to share, to take the empty chair and share your leadership story so we can examine some of these questions together. Please be ready to do so and let us know in the chat that you'd like to do this. Now, I was just rereading this 2014 article by Din and Lord, which I consider like one of my go-tos for leadership. And the article is called "What Have We Learned That Is Critical in Understanding Leadership Perceptions and Leader Performance Relations." It's from the journal Industrial and Organizational Psychology. I've shared the reference in the Telegram group for the dialogue. Happy to share again. But there's one question that we've kind of missed across 5 2-hour episodes and I'd like to ask Bill, Charlotte, and Ja to answer this one. If you see yourself as a leader, and it sounds like you do, or who then are your followers? Because leadership is a social process, right? You can't be a leader, the general, without troops and so on. That involves this iterative exchange between 2 or more individuals, and that leaders and followers produce leadership together. That leadership is shared and distributed among multiple people, but very often when we speak about it, it is about the individual journey. So I'd like to start with Ja for that one.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Reda. The followers, I actually would like to go back to what you said earlier. Considering oneself as a learning leader or leader, to me, it almost reminded me, a few years back when I started considering myself as a feminist. There is certainly a lot of discomfort in there. When you're saying, "Oh, I should be like this way in order to be properly, called that." I would say it's about the community of other people that are also working in this field, right? In the field of learning and development, really designing courses that are trying to help in the fields that what we work for the Geneva Learning Foundation is development and humanitarian fields. So that I would say that's a goal that I am still learning to achieve and try to improve all the time. And I've learned a lot from you, Reda. I think it's you always pose great challenges. Going out of the comfort zone to accept those challenges, and then really to share resources, to always think about, what are the signals, to help learners achieve their learning goals. That's something that I constantly think about. Thank you, Reda.
So if you're a learning leader, are they your learners, people in your programs? Are they your followers in a way? Is that implicitly?
No,
No.
I would say because I'm working right now in this learning and development field, I would say hopefully would be others who also work in learning and development. So it's not the learners themselves. I would say they are the people that I want to help and want to help them achieve their learning goals.
Okay, Charlotte, if you see yourself as a leader, who are your followers in that journey?
Yeah, that's quite interesting question, complex question, Reda. And maybe I'll kind of like echo what Zach said, because throughout, and I think Bill mentioned that earlier, that is many people, or Katusha, I don't know, that many people, they usually don't, see themselves as leaders. And throughout my journey, at no one point did I identify myself as a leader, because there's this concept of leadership. I'm sure you mentioned that, and authority with management and all of that. So it was just like, okay, trying to bring about positive social change, just making things different wherever you are. So right now, to me, my view of leadership is someone who, of a leader is someone who initiates change, taking people from one position to another, in a positive way. So, followers, it will be people that have, been brought to think in kind of like mind. Earlier on in the chat, I said that I've had a lot of what I call indirect and direct mentors. And to me, those mentors, I considered them throughout my life, whether I read books, for what I learned from books, or people that I worked with, consultants that I worked with that got to enrich me as far as immunization is concerned. Those people, I consider them like my leaders, and I as their follower, because they were able to impact. You, Reda, you are a leader to me. I am like a follower. You mentor me. So I could just consider, if able to bring people to think in a like way, to follow a vision that we are carrying to work with us, that is what I can call
okay, interesting. Yeah, I listen. Yeah. I mean, I struggled with this one too. Bill Wigginhorn is, like the corporate leader is the chief executive officer, right? That's the top of the pyramid. Are employees by definition followers? Is that, does leadership sort of reduce itself to that in the corporate learning context? What's your take on this particular question? And you'll have to unmute.
Okay, am I unmuted? It said I wasn't permitted to unmute. So,
whoops. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. As you raised the question, I was thinking about, well, who do you lead? Well, in a corporate environment, it seemed to me I had at least 3 or 4 groups that I tried to lead. And in turn, many of those also led me. So you had the employees of Motorola University. There were about 1,500 around the world. But you also had in the professional community, the Bill Gardners and others of the world, where you hope to be a thought leader in that community. And so in that case, you're trying to lead others, but in many ways they're leading you, because that's part of your development process. And the last one that was very important for me was leading my board. We had a board of directors from Motorola University, and on that board sat the very senior executives, including the CEO. And they expected me to lead the board. Because I remember one time saying, why don't we have a chairman of the board? And the CEO said, you are the chairman. You set the agenda. You help us do the evaluation, et cetera, but you must lead this board in the thinking process. And so, at that point, it was really clear in my mind who my populations were that I needed to be a leader for, and would only be able to lead them if they respected me. Now I'm just an individual contributor sitting in West Florida. And, I'm thinking, who am I leading? Well, in two boards I'm on, I can only lead in thought different board members and the constituencies they represent, because I have no formal group I'm leading. In a neighboring school that really serves primarily the underserved, but it's a technology school, is to be a leader in thought for them and a bridge to the world that has jobs. But it's really those teenagers that are leading me to understand the impact of various technologies, social media, and how to use it. So that would be my answer. As you go through life, it changes. I remember our partner in Nigeria, Chief Henry Wabufo. After observing him for a while, I realized that he led two types of organizations: the corporation, which was pretty standard, but he also led the tribe. And how he functioned leading the tribe was very different than the corporation. And so I was thinking, again, being able to develop the skill sets so that those you lead would respect you, because without that, you can't lead them anywhere. And you probably need to have a different set of skills for the different types of organizations you're trying to lead.
All right, we have a comment from Esfundo Gratitude from South Africa, who says, leadership is more of your inner self-confidence. A leader is always required to learn and more of a forgiving person with great vision for future development. Before we go to the empty chair, I'm going to turn to Morufu Olalekan. Morufu, I'm asking you to unmute, if you will, so we can hear from you. You shared, as we are leaders to others, we're also followers.
I don't know if you can hear me. Good day, all.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. Can you introduce yourself and tell us what are your thoughts? As we are leaders to others, you wrote, we are also followers to others. Can you tell us how this applies to you? How did you come to realize and believe this?
Well, for me, I want to thank you for this opportunity given to me. However, I will say, just as I've written on the dashboard, some people in my organization sees me as their leader, and however, me, I see myself as a followers to those who have been mentoring me over the years and who have been creating opportunities for me to grow within the organization. A brief issue that I'm trying to discuss here. The level I am now in my organization, if you ask me 5 years down the line, if I will be at this level, I will tell you probably it will be difficult for me. But I had a challenge. There was a professor who actually bullied me, intimidated me, and told me, can anything good actually come out of me? And as at that time, he told me that I think I was just a young graduate, and I walked up to some of my mentors, those who tutored me in my first degree and the rest of them. And they told me, Moruf, you can do better. Well, rather than just taking it as a defeat, why not challenge the status quo and achieve what the professor he or she has achieved and surpass him? Looking at the financial implication at that point in time, I decided to take a risk, and as God will have it, even despite the fact that I have not been crowned a professor, everybody is almost calling me a professor with more than 150 international publications, high reputable journals, and editorial board member of more than 100 international journals. However, my take-home point is, just as you feel you are a leader to some persons, you agree with me that you still have those who is still mentoring you, despite the fact that you feel you have achieved or you have attained a status quo. But my concern regarding the African context, particularly the Nigeria where I find myself, is more like a servant, followers, like they see themselves as servants. Even the leaders actually subjugate their followers to make them feel as if they are servants, and as a leader they believe whatever they say is right and is correct, which to me I don't actually buy in that ideas. I think
Thank you.
my humble submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Morufu. All right, we have Emmanuel Musa, who has volunteered, stepped up to fill the empty chair. And Emmanuel Musa, please do introduce yourself. And really what we'd like to hear is, when and how did you realize that this leadership question is significant, that it matters in your work, in your life? Who or what helped you come to consciousness, and what difference has it made for you to realize that leadership matters for you, for others? Please start. Don't forget to introduce yourself, and then if you like to take on this complicated question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity for me to sit on this empty chair. My name is Emmanuel Musa from Kaduna, here in Nigeria. I've had almost 20 years of experience on immunization activities, right from the national level to the subnational level. At all fora, I have done my best to the best of my capability. Now, my story starts from one, when you grow up, you have a dream. And as parents and teachers, normally when you have those dreams, they ask, what will you want to be in life? So I had two things. One, either to be a doctor, and then the next was either to be a pilot. But fortunately, after this high school, things didn't get well with me the way I wanted. So what option do I have? I had to go to another line, which obviously was not my choice, but then probably that was what I had to, that has to be my means of livelihood. I read community health one as my background, and along the line, I started with the government. Then somehow I left to a private, and while I went with the private government, that's when the whole thing started. That's when people come in, they call me doctor. In fact, even in the midst of, I can remember some associate doctors who came in foreignly for an activity. They came to where I was working. I can remember some of them even calling me a doctor. But it kept on still, that's just the beginning of how will I become a doctor when I have read just community health. So, and then the journey started until I will cut the whole story, not until around 2018. Somehow I have a colleague, Dr. Sambo. I'm sure he's part of the call. Once in a while we are in the call together. He said, Manuel, I just saw him, he shouted. What was it? He said, they've given me. I said, what was it? He said, letter, admission. For where? I said, Geneva Learning. I said, what is this Geneva Learning? Please, can you share with me? He said, yeah, you guys can apply. And that was how I think I applied. That was 2018. I never even knew that I didn't get it. Then until 2019, that's when I was given the first offer. That was how the journey started, from one course to the other. And then the turnaround came up with a adaptive leadership course done by Geneva and the Sabin Institute. Since I started, it has never been, I had not stopped. And it has always been learning all through. And I still feel that this is just the beginning. And from that moment, I had to go for my first degree. I went for the second degree. I'm even on the third degree. So what am I saying? I'm trying to say that this is the time and then the challenges of life. I quite agree with the person from South Africa who has just narrated his own kind of story. And he's telling us about leadership and how do we change around our life with the issue of leadership, and how do we look at leadership in our own scope of life. leadership it's actually very key, most especially the last speaker who spoke on Nigeria. We know it has been an issue. And I think if people can invest on training of leaders in Nigeria, Nigeria will be better off the way we are. But notwithstanding, leadership has been key in our day-to-day activities. And I have gained so much from you, Reda. And I'm sure it has been the step of changing me the way I think. I've absorbed so many information when it comes to the digital learning. And I have tried to learn, and I've mentored some of colleagues and friends, and I've encouraged them to be part of this calling. And I equally look forward to, just like Olalekan was saying, so I'm looking forward to people who I feel could be mentors to me in my quest for leadership, in my search for leadership. But then, just like what we were saying, we talked about the issue of silent leaders and the outspoken one. I am so happy the way Bill actually gave my response. That it's not about that. You know, equally you do the leadership, it shows in you. So I'm sure I've picked one or two eureka moments in this calling, and I'm sure I'm going to use it. So it is actually a unique opportunity to share my own moments. It's actually a lengthy story, but I will drop here for other people to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel Musa. And yes, thank you for sharing. And in fact, we have colleagues, and I know from the Scholar platform, from the Geneva Learning Foundation platform, Amel, who says, "Wow, glad to hear Emmanuel's conversation. Keep going, man," she says. And Endayo Iwat, who says, "Great story, adding value wherever space you find yourself." All right, thank you so much. We have 24 minutes remaining in the dialogue. We did not have a set sort of time span. We wanted to take more time than we usually have. We're in this world where things keep going faster. We're all about doing more in less time. And this dialogue is the opposite intent, is really to take a time to step back and reflect and think on a Sunday evening for me, Sunday afternoon, or Sunday morning for some of you, whatever the case may be. In this last segment, we had two options. One was to talk about the value and significance of peer learning. And with Ja, this is something, and with Charlotte, this is something we constantly discuss because it is at the heart of the learning process for the Geneva Learning Foundation. The way we build programs, is based on what we think is the value of peer learning. But I think we will leave that one for the next dialogue because there's something else happening which is much more tied to current events, and that is the impact of COVID and work. And with Bill Gardner and Bill Wigginhorn in the room, I think we have to go there. And I want to take you now to New York City and to the CEO of the investment bank Morgan Stanley. I think this is territory or the corner of the universe that the Bills in the room may be familiar with in some ways. So this is a June 15th article. Now, this is from the New York Post. Don't make any judgments about my reading habits. But what was really interesting, I thought, was, let's see, where's the quote? Yeah. Morgan Stanley's CEO says, "Make no mistake about it. We do our work inside Morgan Stanley offices, and that's where we teach. That's where our interns learn. That is how we develop people." So this is James Gorman saying this during the annual U.S. Financials, Payments, and CRE conference from the bank's Midtown office. And then he also makes the point, if you can go into a restaurant in New York City, you can come into the office. Now, of course, things are constantly changing because of the Delta variant. We happen to be our largest community at the foundation is a community of immunization professionals. So there are people, we know that those of you who are listening, many of you have a lot of knowledge and expertise on this. Now, this was in June, but a month later, James Gorman says, I fundamentally believe the way you and I develop our career is by being mentored and by watching and experiencing the professional skills of those who came before us. You can't do that sitting at home by yourself. There's a limit to Zoom technology, he adds. And then there's this article from Google that reflects a different kind of corporate culture. This is the Google CEO saying, I know this past year hasn't been easy for anyone. Many Googlers are still suffering as the pandemic wears on. We will get through it together as a Google community. I'm profoundly optimistic that once we do, we'll be able to come back together in our offices to see all the people we have missed. The future of work is flexibility. The changes above our starting point to help us do our very best work and have fun doing it. Now, those of us who work in digital learning have been asking ourselves, after the sort of emergency, pivot to online learning, what's the sort of complex, chain of events and sort of perceptions and actions? Are we going to try to go back to the way it was? And is that even an option in countries where less than 1% of the population is vaccinated? That's another question. I want to start here with Bill Gardner, then Bill Wigginhorn, and then we also want to hear from Katyusha, Charlotte, and Ja on this one.
Okay, this is a topic that is part of the discussion I have with every executive that I'm coaching currently. And as you were posing the question, I was trying to think if I could have a meta answer to this, and the answer is no. I can't have a meta answer because every company that I'm involved with is planning to do the reentry differently. For example, a financial institution, since you use Morgan Stanley, a financial institution I'm working for, the vice president I'm working with there has said that part of what has happened is the prevailing wisdom had always been that employees had to be in the building in coats and ties, suits and ties for the men, and a professional dress for women. And they didn't lose productivity. They've actually gained productivity. The exception being customer-facing people. They obviously have to be in the situation where they can hand out money or take money in or whatever. But the employees have been empowered or have empowered themselves in that case to say, we're willing to come back to work, but we're not willing to come back to work 5 days a week, 8 to 5 or whatever the hours are. Because we're being more productive. There's no commute. So that's a couple of hours given back to us, which sometimes we use for the company, sometimes for ourselves. There's no commute. There's no extended period of time to get ready and professional clothes or take things by the dry cleaners and things like that. So they are trying to figure out how can we keep the culture which we've established and the learning opportunities that we've established and do it where employees have more freedom to determine where they are working. And how they are working. On the other hand, I have another CEO that sounds like the Morgan Stanley guy who said, once this has gotten to a place where we can all be safe together, we're going to all be together. And they started to experience some turnover from employees who just have said, no, I'm no longer willing to spend so much of my time on the road or so much of my time unproductively to get to you so I can sit in an office and work. So I think one of the issues that we're having as a meta issue is that we're still talking about this either or thing. And my belief is almost every company is going to have some type of blend. That there are going to be times when employees need to be together in the office. There is going to need to be a part on the leadership to figure out how to make those times when everybody's in the office more productive and more, more attractive to people. So they actually want to come. Let's say we say everybody has to be in the office on Wednesday, the rest of the week, do what you and your manager work out. They need to make that Wednesday a time that people look forward to instead of, oh no, I have to go to the office today. So I believe that we're going to come out of this with an innovative redesign of organizations. And I'll just say this too. I have one client who has last December, they let all of their regional office building leases go. And they told the employees on those far-flung offices, we're going to give you some money to support you set up a home office, and we're going to use the money we save from that commercial real estate to bring everybody, it's a smaller company, but to bring everybody here to Austin for a week, maybe every other quarter. And we're going to have a lot of time together to work, and we're going to have a lot of time to play in the evenings. We're going to do great meals and stuff like that. So I don't think we know what's going to come out of it, but we do know it's going to be more complex than 8 to 5. Everybody has to be in the office in every company.
Yeah. Very interesting. What struck me, I'll tell you what struck me, is that when James Gorman says that's where we teach, that's where our interns learn, I think that's the first time I've ever seen a CEO that like the main justification for, people sharing a physical space is learning. He's not talking about them going to training. He's recognizing that learning is embedded in work. And that's a big shift. Yes, I thought that was, in a way, that was really impressive, even if it's embroiled in the sort of relations with the complex relations with staff and changes in sort of people's behavior in work. Bill Wigginhorn, if you are James Gorman's chief learning officer, what do you advise him and why?
Well, I remember reading that article. And at first I was taken aback by it, saying, how dare he tell everyone the only way they can do work is to show up and go back to the old way. But when he goes on to describe this, really, it's a community building exercise by being there. It's sharing the values. It's beginning to let people watch others as their mentors. It started to make sense. However, if you look at a lot of the high-tech firms, the people are very comfortable working remotely. And I agree with Bill. I think in many of those firms, it's going to be a change model, which will be a mix of coming together and working separately. As an introvert, I think this has been great because you have more time by yourself. You can kind of control who you're going to be working with, and you don't spend all the time on the office politics. Now, if I was at CLO, I guess I would look at understanding better the employees that we want to train and develop and make sure that their values and how they think they're going to learn is similar to how the CEO thinks it should be done. And when there is a difference between those, figure out a process by which he can learn from them what they expect and how his own goals can be accomplished. I don't think it's the right thing to go in and just say you're wrong, but I think you have to help that CEO discover that maybe he could be wrong and there's a better way of doing it.
Yeah.
A couple of the senior executives I talked to have actually gotten to enjoy this remote working, enjoy not traveling. And as a matter of fact, we just had a review with one of the financial officers this past week who's always traveling. He talked about how much he enjoyed not traveling, and I kind of insisted that we get together. And then the more I reflected about it, I thought it was really one of our most productive meetings because we didn't waste any time. We were able to really focus, and we're able to invite others in who geographically weren't here. So, I just think you have to help that leader discover the new way of doing things, but at the same time, making sure that what he thinks needs to be accomplished can be accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I think it's a terrific insight to recognize that, that daily interaction in a shared physical space is where where most significant learning happens. I do think there's one key point that's being missed is when he says you can't do that sitting at home by yourself, there's a limit to Zoom technology. That is undeniable. Okay, we've all experienced it, even on this call with like muting, unmuting, but it's limited today, but what matters is the rate at which it is changing. And going back to the office, or saying that the only way to teach and learn and develop people is to do it the way it has been done in the past. All that's going to do, in a way, is going to slow the rate of the digital transformation for that organization, for the organizations that make that choice to try to revert back, to do the reset backwards, and slowing down the digital transformation of your organization and your people cannot be in your business interest. So I would say absolutely right about the situation right now, but missing the point about the rate of change. And that's actually something that as humans, we know from learning sciences, that's like really hard to get. How you go the steam engine, you're talking about decades of change, the transition to the oil, and then mobile phones, 5 to 10 years, and yes, there you are. The whole world has adopted a new technology. So that's my sense. Any comments about the Google message, which is sort of wrapped in a different kind of coding? And Charlotte, Katyusha, Ja, any thoughts on this? Thinking about what's going on here with these very large, corporate entities figuring this out, and then individuals and entities, organizations of all kinds also having to go through that change. Katyusha, you work in the UN system. I don't know what you feel comfortable saying or not, but I know there's some very interesting changes going on there in response to the pandemic.
Yes, no, I first of all, I agree with what has been said up to now. I think it very much is linked to what is the organizational culture and also different needs of people. I think my own personal experience is that the UN and my organization in particular has gone way beyond, trying to really build an online culture. We have touch base. We speak a lot with each other. We don't travel, but we speak a lot, and we discover we can do a lot remotely, a lot more. We have coffee breaks and so on. So there is really been that sense of we don't see each other, but we're still all together in working. I think has been clearly there. I've enjoyed it, but not everybody will like it, and that's something else to keep into mind. People have different needs. There are people that don't want to work from home, maybe because they have a small home, maybe because they don't have a good connection, maybe because they have kids at home. And so I think that the future will be really a bit of a mix, and it's perhaps the flexibility to allow people what works to choose what works best for them. And some people will prefer to work from home and maybe go in for specific meetings or things. Others will prefer to be in an office environment because they have the space, they have maybe an office, better structure, and it's just they prefer to be at work.
But could you when you think about the last year or the time you spent working from home, can you think of a time when you realized that you were missing a learning opportunity that if you had been sitting side by side with colleagues in the shared physical space, something that was preventing you from getting your work done? Would you actually be able to identify at least one incident, one time when that was obviously true to you?
Personally, for me, no. I enjoy working from home. I've been working remotely for a long time, and I've enjoyed not having to travel. I actually switched my learning, the work that I do with different country offices remotely, and everyone has adapted very well. So, of course, there are things if you need to do an evaluation, if you need to do certain types of work, that's the other point. It really depends on the work that you need to do. You might need to eventually go and meet and discuss with people. But again, I'm very extrovert. I talk a lot. I don't have a problem talking on Zoom calls and muting myself. And that's not always the case in a call. So there are people that do prefer maybe to have a chat over coffee, or they prefer being face to face. So for me, no, absolutely not. And I personally enjoy it. I also do think that from time to time it's nice to meet in an office environment, but I save time, I'm more focused, etc. I mean, it's all been said before, but I do recognize that it's not the same for everyone, and that's why I really think that something that really is suited and tailored to different needs is probably what we're going to have to agree. And there will be people that will prefer to go to the office for all set of reason. And I think that's okay. But the freedom to others to be able to work remotely, it's also, to be honest, quite priceless for me. It's really nice.
Yeah. Ja?
Thanks, Reda. It was really interesting seeing in the chat, Bill Gardner shared about the informal and incidental learning. So it just happened, the JP Morgan CEO's comment reminded me actually in Geneva, there are a lot of finance companies. And I knew one company that actually the CEO was kind of sharing the same thing. And then I know that one employee shared with me, they don't trust me. They don't trust us. So I think there is an issue of trust, which will be linked with motivation. Our employees will think, I'm only treated as labor, right? I'm contributing only in this sense, and the company does not care about my well-being in general. And then there's another comment that was shared saying, I don't really miss working in the office, but the only thing I miss is about the chats that I had with my colleagues next to the coffee machine when I took a break, or going to lunch breaks together and having lunch. And so, and thinking back to our team, how our own team, small team functions. Charlotte is based in Cameroon. I'm based in Geneva. Reda, you're based in Nancy. Like, everyone works from different places. We rarely get to see each other. However, I think being human together is something that really motivating, but we can create other opportunities outside from just being in a physical office space to have that as well. But I also hear what Kachusia is saying. So I think at the end of the day, it's about efficiency. It's also all about catering to different people's needs, but being human together.
I give you one personal example. Is my son's English teacher said that, so this is a bit more than a bit anecdotal, it's completely so. She has a brother in the UK who had to stop, first year at university, had to stop going to campus and so on, and basically broke his education and his social life. And she was horrified, and legitimately so. I think many young people, people of all ages, went through all kinds of fairly traumatic change with the shock of the pandemic. But I said to her, well, why is, so that campus, that residential experience of the university campus in the countries where it's where it's a strong model is incredibly powerful. It's transformative for a lot of young people. But why should going to class be sort of joined at the hips with having a social life as a 20-something, or in today's world as at any age, and are there ways of sort of uncoupling the things that we take for granted are bundled together? So can that, and that's where I think the technologies we're using now are sort of early days of the steam engine level, and it's going to change incredibly quickly. Thinking about how we create those social spaces, in the Zoom call, and maybe rethinking what that social space is. And I think that's where, so with our small team, whether it can scale is a different matter, I actually can feel the presence of fellow team members. We don't even say hello in Slack anymore, but there is a constant presence that to me is actually far stronger than what I have experienced working in shared physical spaces. Now, I haven't experienced that very much. I started working remotely circa 1996 when I figured out I could, and experienced that as exhilarating freedom. But that's, so I acknowledge my biases, but that, I think we've been through our practice sort of at least a few years ahead, and what we're feeling, at least what I'm feeling, is a very powerful connection that's about being human. But that raises another question, to what extent is a work environment, the nature of work, humanizing? To what extent the organization, the environment that's created is something that helps us feel and exercise and realize our human potential, and to what extent is it about reducing that potential? I think that is, again, something that needs to be unbundled from the medium, from whether it's a physical space or whether it is connecting by digital means. But at least from my personal experience, is very incredibly powerful connection, opportunities for learning, far more efficient. And maybe in that efficiency is so efficient that we might create more room, more space, more time for social learning, for social being, for being human together than we currently can. So the risk is to just sort of not see the rate of change, to miss that. That's the key point. And to say, look at how things are today and see that, it's horrible yes, compared to the enjoyment we would have if we were all sitting around the table. So that's, I think it's very early days, and I just hope that we need to, to keep moving. So I would like to ask for final thoughts, and we are out of time. Would love to hear yes, Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Reda. Just quickly, I just wanted to contextualize a little bit on the discussion based on our context, that is low middle income countries where digital experience or transformation is still at the early ages. I think the pandemic was kind of like a little bit beneficiary in terms of most colleagues never knew anything about Zoom or Zoom calls. Even banks, so many banks were not digital. They had to go digital because of the pandemic. And now colleagues regularly meet via Zoom. Supervision can go on remotely with constant contact because of that. So I just think there is, as you say, Reda, early ages, but I think there is a future in digital transformation as far as work culture is concerned. Now it's been a great evening, and I've learned a lot from Bill Gardner, Bill Wigginhorn, and Katusha Farah, all the others. It's been great. So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. Thanks, Reda.
All right, thank you, Charlotte. We're out of time, but remember, this is episode 5. Episode 6 is coming up at the end of August. I want to offer a round of applause to all of our contributors, key contributors, folks online, many of you. Just a few I'm going to be able to acknowledge. Amel has been with us the whole way. She says, great, congratulations, thanks all. Emanuela Chinoni Odunze, who joined us from Nigeria. Sfundo Gratitude had a question about grooming leadership. We'll come back to that. I think that question of developing leaders is key to where we want to take the dialogue. Some praise for Emmanuel Musa, who took the empty chair today, and many more comments online. Once again, thank you, and see you 1 month from now for the next episode of the dialogue of the Geneva Learning Foundation on learning, leadership, and impact. Take care.